Here comes that familiar feeling of anger, and she doesn't do anything to choke that. She lives in it. It's this feeling that you could call Targaryen craziness, you could give it all of these names that it doesn't deserve, because it is just grief. It's hurt.
And spent 2 seasons telling Dany not to attack King's Landing to prevent the civilian casualties, but as we saw in the fucking episode up until the bells rang, she had complete control in about 5 minutes. She obliterated all of the city's defenses and had Cersei in the palm of her hand. If she hadn't proceeded to go mad, it would have been one of the greatest victories in the history of Westeros.
Well, take this for what it is, but it's not meant in a spirit of hate. I do want to be clear that I do like Dragon Demands a lot. There is that bias. And I don't like Mauler a lot. So there's that bias. However, in this case, and I would include myself, it seems we all kind of got it wrong. Now, there seems to be a huge convergence with people who hated Season 8 of Game of Thrones. There's some people who defended it. And I think some people did it for legitimate reasons. I'm not going to address the pro-defense here. We're going to stick to the anti-side. And despite a lot of differences, political differences, cultural differences, there seemed to be convergence that Season 8 was pretty awful for the anti-side. And one of the most awful things about it was the way Daenerys' story was handled and her particular, mass murder in King's Landing. And we thought Emilia also disliked the ending. And apparently, yes, she did, but not in the way we thought. So a lot of these videos, but they went with the theory that Emilia agreed with us that character assassination happened. And a recent interview, she seems to be affirming that, but not in the way we thought. But there was one prominent YouTuber who apparently was more correct than the rest of them. Again, the same way I'm sort of biased against some people and for some people, I'm kind of mixed on Lindsay Ellis. I do recognize she's very talented, and I do like a lot of her videos. But in some cases, I think she's bat crazy moronic. I think this video on Game of Thrones was kind of mixed. I agreed with a lot of it, but then she started going in a certain direction, which I found, frankly, very shocking. But in terms of getting Emilia correct and Dany correct, she was closer to the truth. She thought Daenerys deserved to live. So it wasn't the right decision to kill her off. Whereas I think even people who hated Game of Thrones at the end thought that was the one good thing that Benioff and Weiss did do. Like, killing her off was the right decision. They should have done it differently, or they should have done it sooner, but that was actually a good decision. And she's saying, no, it wasn't a good decision. Daenerys wasn't as evil as we think she is. So really all this judgment that she deserved to die or had to die for the story to be better is not correct. I disagree. I think that respectfully Emilia is wrong, but we were going with a wrong assumption. And I think it's good for clarity that we correct the record, that at least Emilia would not agree with a lot of these videos. She probably agreed that, yeah, Season 8 was bad, but it was bad because they didn't let her live and basically essentially validate her kind of feminist style imperialism. So now we're going to hear Ellis and her side, and I think, good or bad, she was at least more accurate with what was happening to Daenerys as a character.
Have been like, hell yes, thank God, literally anyone but Cersei. But then they keep explaining it like it makes sense what happened. But before she breaks, she's sad that the people of the North prefer Jon Snow, a native of the North. And I guess Dany kind of forgot that despite losing the reach with the Tyrells, she still has the support of the North, the Vale, the Iron Islands, Dorne, and presumably Storm's End now that she's legitimized Gendry. But she decides that she'll never be loved because the people of the North prefer their hometown boy to Dragon Lady.
Far more people in Westeros love you than love me. I don't have love here.
Sure. What they foreshadowed is Daenerys doing awful things when she thought she had a good reason for doing them. Not, no reason.
Well, again, I disagree. I do think Dany was not good. I think we got enough hints she wasn't meant to be good. I think what Ellis misses, and even Emilia Clarke kind of missed, is the Dune factor. That George basically did steal a lot of Dune. If I'm going to be harsh towards Robert Jordan for, I think, borrowing too much from Dune without giving credit, then George R.R. Martin did the same thing. Because this trope of the central hero becoming not necessarily the villain, but not being who we think he or she is basically something that Frank Herbert really pioneered. Now, the story has been done before, but in terms of a big, sprawling epic, really Frank Herbert is at the top of the list. He really committed to the idea. And it shocked a lot of Dune fans, but at the same time, I think a lot of people grew to respect it. So even people who liked Paul thought, okay, I don't like what you did, but this was a very intriguing angle to follow up on. The problem is when Benioff and Weiss were given this basic story idea, the story idea is fine, but the way they did it was really horribly stupid. I think we all agree Benioff and Weiss have some talent, but definitely with season 8, they were just being very lazy, being very hackish, and just didn't put the effort in to really convince us that this made sense to Daenerys' point of view. But apparently to Emilia, they did a good enough job. The problem was the final ending where she gets killed off. Like, she thought, okay, this is a pretty bold decision, but then why kill her off? I mean, I guess in her mind, and in Lindsay Ellis's essay, well, Daenerys did a lot of good. So yes, she did a lot of atrocities, but she also helped a lot of people. So I guess cosmically, when we think it through, she did more good than bad. So why is she being punished? Well, I think Ellis seems to know the books, so I'm really surprised she's coming to that conclusion. Yes, it's true, most of Game of Thrones and most of the books are morally gray, but it's not right to say that there's no such thing as good or evil. He's not denying that good and evil exist, but it's really hard to figure out what those categories are. From my perspective, the way I understand it, Dany did do something evil, and she did deserve to die. But playing devil's advocate, I can see where Ellis is coming from. Well, why are we having the special standard for Daenerys? I don't think we are. I don't think there is a special standard. But now, after Emilia Clarke and her interview, at least this feels more plausible. So if you are pro Daenerys, then I think you should be partly proud because at least Emilia Clarke thinks, yeah, I mean, you can criticize her, of course, but she made rational decisions. I think that's wrong, but playing devil's advocate, well, at least factually, she's corrected a lot of misinterpretations. So we're probably going to be debating for months and years whether season 8 could have ended better. It should have ended with Daenerys living, which I don't agree with, but is now a viable interpretation. So people who thought, well, at least killing off Dany, that had to be the bare minimum they had to do. Well, apparently we were wrong. We have to recognize at least the performer who did Daenerys and has some insight here is disagreeing with us. So that is worth noting just to keep the factual record straight.